Yeah, that's pretty much it, really. So, Richard, hello, and thank you so much for your time.
Hello, Nick. It's great to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
No, you're absolutely welcome. Have you had dinner already?
Yeah.
Oh, very nice. Did you cook?
Oh well, not well.
Oh, well, as you know, I just had a curry myself, but slightly overdid the vegetables, so they're a bit soft. But hey, I was in a bit of a hurry to get myself sorted for this. So, Richard, I have known you for too long. Joking. I've known you now for must have been, I think, about 4 or 5 years, and we first met when I was working at Innocent Packaging, and I remember you came along to talk to us about your compost boxes and your compost methodology. And at that time, I knew very little about compost. I was working for a compostable packaging company, but I knew very little. And then we struck up a conversation and sort of formed a friendship from there, really. And then you had a very big impact on my, I guess, understanding of compost and love affair. And I'll never forget me and a colleague, I think it was Bernard at the time, who went over to Waiheke where you were living at the time, and you had one of your compost bins set up. And as I think you've done to many people, asked us to put our hand into the compost. And we immediately pulled it back and shocked by the heat that was coming out of the compost. And that really just blew my mind and really stoked my curiosity, I think. And then from that time, we kept on working together and collaborating through my time at Innocent Packaging. And then once I left there, I came and worked with you directly for, I think it was about a year, wasn't it? And helped you install more compost bins around the place and keep delivering on your dream of an urban network of hot composting and community composting around Auckland first and foremost, but all around New Zealand ideally. But could you tell me a little bit, because I know that sort of chapter of your story, and I know a bit about where you're up to now, and you've just released the new business, the CarbonCycle company, which we're going to talk about, the Compost CarbonCycles company, sorry. And we're going to talk about that a bit too. But I just want to go back a bit because you've got a few years on me, and so you had a bit of a life before we met, and I know a little bit about it. But did you want to give us a bit of an introduction to yourself and touching a little bit on your previous profession and how you got into composting?
Well, it's quite interesting. I spent 30 years as a lawyer before I really got re-interested in composting.
Right.
As a young person, I did a lot of planting of native trees on a property in the Bay of Islands
Yes.
in an attempt to get wood pigeons back into that area.
Right.
So I did a lot of research on trees and planted different trees and all the rest of it. And I really wanted to learn how to compost in order to get those trees a better start in life. But I could never really work it out. I never really got past the browns and greens, and I didn't have much success with it. But the trees grew well anyway. Then I was a lawyer for 30 years, and I tired of that life. And I went to live in London with my wife, and we had young children at that time. And I saw them taking grass clippings to the tip in black plastic bags, and I thought, that's not right. Maybe we can compost that stuff. I didn't know whether you could or not, or how it would work. But the headmistress said, yeah, go for your life. There's a piece of wasteland in the corner of the school. It was about half the size of a soccer pitch. So I looked in a book about how to build a compost box, and I built some big compost boxes and started experimenting.
And so that was what, 10, 12 years ago?
Uh, 2008.
So what are we now?
Yeah,
2020.
12,
So yeah,
12 years ago.
12
Yeah.
years ago.
Yeah.
And how was it? Just was it like I don't know how to put it, was it an addiction, or was it just a curiosity, or what led you down the path now? Because for those who don't sort of know the premise to that question, Richard has lived and breathed compost and improving his compost methodology and system ever since. And is quite fanatic about it. So yeah, was it a aha moment, or was it just a gradual increase in your curiosity?
Well, it was 30 years sitting at a desk, and
Yeah.
most weekends as well, and you start to yearn for a connection back into nature.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd always wanted to get to know how to compost. I'd tried before, but without success.
Mm-hmm.
And so the opportunity to get my hands dirty arose, and I took it and experimented with it. We composted all the food waste from the school, all the green waste from the grounds. I found that the compost boxes I had made were way too big a capacity for what the school generated by way of organic waste. So I started collecting waste from the community, hedge clippings, grass clippings, food waste, whatever I could, leaves. And I'd ask people for a donation to the school kitchen garden fund. And so I just learned as I went. But they grew fantastic food in that compost, and the local MP came along one day and we fed him out of the garden. And he said to me that he wanted me to put that composting system and the garden system and everything that went with it
Mm-hmm.
into every school in Richmond. So,
Yeah.
But that system required me to put concrete posts in the ground, or concrete wooden posts into the ground, and which was fine in the British summer. But the second school I did it in, it was winter time and the ground was a bit uneven. It took me 3 weeks to get all the, you have to get about 8 posts all aligned, upright, in the snow and ice. And I started thinking there had to be a better way of getting the same efficiency and clean operation
Mm-hmm.
of the composting boxes. So, and I just wasn't willing to let that go. So it took me about 10 years, but I worked out a way of doing it, and that's now the CarbonCycle composter.
And did you want maybe to explain a bit about the design of the bins, because that's quite impressive, I think, and how you came up with the design? You touched a bit on the challenges that you learned with the kind of old concrete post methodology, but yeah, tell us a bit about the design of the bins now and how you came up with that design.
Well, what it had to be, you had to be able to get access to it from all sides. If you're making a compost, you will always need to make adjustments to it, and you need to get at it.
Mm-hmm.
And every compost bin that I had come across that wasn't, a permanent concreted structure in the ground, had 3 sides which were structural and fixed. So in order to turn them, you could take slats out of the front, but then you had to either lift the contents up over the barrier between one box and the next.
Yeah.
Or you'd have to pull it out onto the grass and then put it back into the next box.
Yes.
That's a hugely labor-intensive process, and I always had to fortify myself to do it, because you had to set aside like an hour and 20 minutes, and it was hard work. So what I was striving for was a compost box that enabled you to have a stiff frame where you could slot the boards into it and take them all out, so that there was no, like above the bottom rail, which is like, maybe 7 or 8 inches off the ground, you had complete open access to it.
Yeah.
You can attach the boxes to each other,
Mm-hmm.
so that to turn one box into the other, all you needed to do was take the removable slats out of the wall between, or anywhere else that you needed to get access,
Mm-hmm.
and then use a drag fork to drag it,
Yeah.
drag the compost from one box to the next. So you're getting the benefit of gravity. You're working with gravity, basically, for most of the time. So that really sort of cut the workload by about 2/3.
Drastically, right?
Yeah.
Just sorry, Richard. I just want to quickly let people know that I've put a link on the webinar chat there that goes to the CarbonCycle compost website if you want to have a look at these compost boxes if you haven't seen them before. And I also just want to make a quick apology to some people who were trying to get in and didn't have the password, so apologies for that. But we are recording this, so if you missed the first 5 minutes or so, you'll be able to see it once we post the footage later, so apologies for that. But anyway, I've got here with me Richard Wallis from the CarbonCycle Compost, and who is an absolute wealth of knowledge relating to compost and the biosphere and the circle of life, really. That's one way I'll sum it up, Richard. But Richard is just sort of talking to us at the moment about how he got to where he is at the moment, and he was a lawyer for 30 odd years, and then really fell in love with composting while he's living over in London, and composting at his children's school. And now he came back here and he's just telling us about the bins and how he designed them and why he's designed them like they are. So carry on, Richard, sorry to interrupt. You were just sort of saying that you built them with 4 sides so that you could get at the compost at any point, and also that you were able to drag the material from one bin to another by just removing the slats rather than having to dig up and over a wall. So carry on from there, and how you sort of explaining how you came up with the design and manufactured your first what used to call the New Zealand box.
Well, the start of the design was when I was trying to put the second lot of compost boxes, a set of 3 boxes, concreting posts, like, I don't know, 6, 8 posts into the ground, frozen ground, uneven terrain. And to do that, you have to get all of the posts to be perfectly perpendicular and perfectly aligned, and the exact distance to the millimeter apart, right? And I started, as time wore on and I got colder and colder doing this job, my wife got more and more irritated with me. So I started thinking, well, maybe you could set up some frame whereby you could have the posts arranged in the frame, and you would know exactly where to dig each hole.
Yeah.
And the frame could hold them in place.
Yeah.
Well, the concrete set.
Yeah.
And then that led to the thought, well, actually, why can't I just work out a way to hold those posts in perfect alignment without concrete, so that they're portable, flat packable?
Yes.
And, because if you put compost box in a school and it's concreted in the ground, if they don't want to do the compost anymore, what are you going to do? Go and dig all the posts out?
And all those materials are lost, right?
And you got a post with a big lump of concrete on the end of it. So it really had to be, I'd fallen in love with the idea that the minister, well, he's now, Zach Goldsmith was his name. He's now a minister of the Crown, I think, in London. But he had put into my head the idea that we could get this going in every school in Richmond. And I fell in love with that idea because I'd seen the difference that making compost, growing food and eating it had on the kids in the school in London, kids that had attention deficit disorder, and that they were in their element, and they became, you could see the self-respect that they developed over being involved with something that they loved and something that was useful and something that other people respected. So I never let go of that idea that we would get composting going in schools. It didn't work out in London, and we came home and I thought, well, we can do it in Auckland. We'll just get all of Auckland schools to make compost. and I'll design a compost bin that'll make it feasible to do that. So it took me, I don't know, till 2016 to work out how to actually make a compost box like that, and then to get a patent on it and manufacture it and so on. So here we are.
So here we are. And I also want you to talk about your brother's influence here, because I know your brother is an engineer for a Formula One racing car team. Is that right?
Well, he designs Formula One motor racing engines.
Wow. And yeah, and how did he help you?
Oh, well, working out how you could possibly build a compost box like this, because no one's ever done it before.
Yeah.
And I remember when we built the first prototype and we filled it up, and I was holding my breath, I thought, surely this can't hold together. But it did, and it was a euphoric moment. But his expertise with materials and engineering, and he's an innovator himself, and he never gives up. So.
And I've put a few of these boxes together, as you know, and they're pretty quick. We got pretty quick at it when we were doing it together, and I'm sure you've got even quicker again. But I was always pretty impressed with, the design, where we screw in the bolts. There's 2 bolts on each 4 posts that go into each 4 base posts as well that hold it all together. And that was beautifully designed, but very quick and easy, and making it pretty quick and easy to put up and put down. Was that the original design, or did you have to do a few different versions to get to that?
Oh, well, it's constantly evolving, but that was the basic original design.
Yeah. And the other thing that I always remember, Richard, working with you was when we came up with I'm taking some of the credit here, which is probably unfair, but with the rat proofing. So the other thing about these boxes is that they have, you install metal wire. You might want to have a go at explaining this better than I do, but you install some metal wire on the bottom, and so that the rats can't dig underneath and get into the bottom of the compost. And I remember that when we first did it, we laid, one bit of wire one way and another bit of mesh wire the other way. And you admitted to me that that wasn't part of the design. That was a bit of luck, that we then came up with a strip of metal that we could then drill into and clamp that wire, that mesh, to each of the 4 base sides, and then therefore creating a barrier to the rats getting up.
Yeah. That was a bit of good fortune, really, because
it was.
That was really just an incident of the fact that the bottom rail had to have some folds in it, if you like, to give it strength, because it's a fairly thin aluminium section, and those folds enabled us to slot those retaining strips of aluminium between the posts and the bottom rail, and enabled us to hold the mesh, the rat-proof mesh, in place. So that was great work, Tim. I would take my hat off to you. But you'll be disappointed to know that we've designed an even better system now.
Well, I'm sure Tim. I know Tim's not listening in, but Tim's working with you now. So who's working with you now? We're doing the composting.
Yeah. So Tim Bowater.
Yeah.
Is helping with the installation of the boxes, and we've now got quite a few boxes in different places. Yeah. Like Highwick House, and down at the Viaduct Harbour, and at OMG up in Simon Street. And so we supervise a lot of the composting as well. So
that's a nice segue into a question I want you to answer, is around what's the kind of, I know the answer, but can you explain to the listeners about your vision for these boxes? So you've created these amazing, beautiful, easy to use, rat-proofed compost bins that, because of the methodology, but also because of the size, they can create high temperatures. I know you've had the temperature up to as high as 85 degrees, which I've seen, which I know is not great for compost quality, but it's just a sign of what they're capable of. But so that's the sort of functionality of them. Feel free if you want to add anything more to that. But did you want to touch on the vision for these compost bins and what you want to see happen across Auckland and across New Zealand and across the world?
Well, my ambition was not as great then as it is now. Like I had seen that you could make this fantastic compost in a basically at a school, and you can do it in your own backyard. You can do it anywhere. A compost that's capable, for instance, of composting compostable packaging and compostable water bottles.
And weeds, you've done quite a few weeds, haven't you?
Weeds are fine.
Meat,
bones, shellfish.
Yeah.
There's nothing that is compostable that you can't compost in a box like that. And so I always laughed when there was a great debate about compostable packaging and whether the packaging companies had to say that it was commercially compostable because people in their backyards, a lot of that stuff they couldn't compost in a cold compost. But I always laughed because you wouldn't say these boxes are commercial compost, right? But you can put it up in your backyard in half an hour. And compost anything. And you can compost it better than a commercial composter can because you've got greater control over what's going into it. And of course you can do it without having to transport all that organic so-called waste to some distant, massive centralized composting system. So really all I wanted to do was to get a composting system that would enable schools to compost all their organic residues, to take organic material from the surrounding community, make compost and be able to grow food, to teach kids the full cycle from compost to soil, to grow the food, to the kitchen, learning how to cook it and how to eat it and become accustomed and to enjoy eating vegetables. And I always remember in London, because the streets there are really narrow and the rubbish trucks had come down the street and they could barely fit between the parked cars on either side of the road.
Yes.
And they'd come to the school and they'd pick up all this organic waste. This was before I started doing the composting, big bins of it. And I thought, why do they do that? Like, is that absolutely necessary? And I never really, I thought, well, they must know what they're doing. There must be a reason that they do that.
I know you don't think that anymore.
No, well, I don't. But so my ambition was just for schools to start with and teach kids. But what I've come to realize is that, particularly with working with For the Love of Bees, is that actually you can, in Auckland, for example, you could compost 170,000 tonnes of food waste locally using a box system like this. And that means that you can actually grow the fruit and vegetables that would feed a city and supply its mineral and vitamin, the 5 a day, to every person living in the city and to feed them within walking distance of where they live. And all you need is a network of hyper-local urban farms. And we know from what's been done at OMG that that's feasible and it's economic. The farmer up there is farming 500 square meters of land and he's earning $1,000 a week from it. So, and it completely eliminates the organic waste to landfill problem. So my ambition now is for that to happen.
So I sum it up by sort of calling it an urban network of hot composting sites aligned beside regenerative urban farms. It's my catchphrase.
Yeah, and I guess the thing is, see, what I didn't realize in the early days either was I thought, well, you make compost and you're putting carbon in the soil and you're recycling the nutrients, right? Mm. But actually, what's really improving the carbon content of the soil and making the nutrients available is growing the food in that compost. So the compost, when you make it, it emits a lot of the carbon content into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Mm. Some people think that's a good thing or a bad thing, but actually it's a good thing, because if you do it locally where there's vegetation around, that carbon dioxide is feeding photosynthesis. Mm-hmm. So if you've got a good vegetative cover, mm-hmm. it doesn't escape into the atmosphere. Mm-hmm. It goes into the leaves, creates photosynthesis, mm-hmm. and within minutes of that photosynthesis generating sugars, mm-hmm. most of those sugars end up back in the ground, mm-hmm. within minutes. Mm-hmm. And so it's those sugars that are feeding the microorganisms and the fungi, yes. in the ground, yes. that are building the soil life web, the soil food web, yes. and mining and refining minerals from the rock and the clay in the soil and turning it into bioavailable, plant-available minerals. Yes. And it's that process that's really sequestering carbon in the ground. Yes, yes. And recycling the minerals and holding water.
Two things I want to jump on there, Richard. One, the same thing happens, doesn't it, when you put the compost onto the soil? So that still enhances the microbial life within the soil, and that same process you just talked about happens. So it's not just from the carbon dioxide going up to the trees and the leaves, but it's also the compost you put on the soil, correct?
Yeah.
And the second thing about the carbon dioxide being emitted, that's all biogenic CO2, right? It's all part of the cycle of life. So carbon and carbon dioxide is not a bad thing. And a lot of people, I think, like to see life in black and white, but it's not. It's a lot of grey. And carbon dioxide is not bad. The fact that we're bringing carbon out of the soil in the form of fossil fuels that are out of our environment, that are down in the ground, that we're pulling those out and burning them and adding more or new carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that's the problem, right? It's not the biogenic circulation of carbon.
Well, that's part of the problem. The drilling for and the mining of hydrocarbons that are, in the form of coal and oil. Mm-hmm. That the burning of that material does add carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. But the interesting thing is that there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere from loss of soil carbon from agricultural soils. There's more carbon from loss of soil carbon than there is from burning hydrocarbons that we've taken out of the ground.
Wow.
So what that tells us is that if we can restore the carbon levels in the soil, that is a more critical thing to do than to reduce our carbon emissions from burning fossil fuels.
Right.
And the way to do it is very, very simple. You turn all your organic matter into compost. You never burn it. You always compost it. And you grow your crops, your food in it, regeneratively. And regeneratively means in a way that takes carbon out of the atmosphere, photosynthesizes it into sugar, puts it in the ground, feeds the soil and it changes the structure of the soil so that it can hold air and water and be a host to a mass of life under the ground, mm-hmm. which will mine the mineral nutrients that will go into the vegetation and everything that eats that vegetation will absorb those minerals, and everything that eats the things that eat the vegetation will get those minerals as well. And every living thing needs those minerals, and the only place to get them is out of the ground. And the only way to get them out of the ground is with that massive web of life under the ground.
So we spoke about this briefly before we came on, but a lot of people's understanding around food waste, we both hate using the word food waste because we know it's an incredibly valuable resource, as you've just touched on, but their thinking is that going to landfill is bad because it creates methane, which is right, and methane's a powerful greenhouse gas. It traps heat, continuing to warm the planet. But tell us why, you kind of touched on it there anyway, but why it's not just about not creating methane. It's about...
No, I think a lot of people think, we've got to get food waste out of landfill because it generates methane. And so they think, well, that's the beginning and end of the problem. But the real problem is not getting it out of landfill. The real issue is we should be composting it. Right? We shouldn't even be thinking of taking it out of our communities, because if you keep that so-called food waste, it's really a nutritional resource. If you keep that nutritional resource in your community and you use it by composting it and growing food in it, then you solve the biggest problem that there is in causes of climate change and warming.
I also want to touch on...
It's that simple.
It is. It is. It's hard for some people to grasp all that, isn't it? I guess people still don't understand how much life there is in soil, and just sort of see it as dirt and under our feet, and you just dig it up and move it somewhere. But actually, that's why there's life on Earth, right? Is from all the life and the natural systems that go on in the soil. Yeah,
well, I think of it in terms. I used to. I had a share in a yacht, and we got into a few storms, and at times I was in fear of my life, that we would capsize, right? And the thing that stops a yacht from capsizing is that it has a massive weight of lead beneath the surface. And it's that weight of lead that keeps the boat upright when all other forces are trying to tip it over. And life on Earth is exactly like that. And so what you find is that the capacity of the Earth to support life above the ground is directly related to the volume of life below the ground. And what you find is that the ratio is that there's about 10 times the amount of life below the ground than there is above it. And the reason for that is that the life below the ground is busy mining the mineral nutrients out of the ground to feed it up into the vegetation that feeds everything else. So if you want to have a biomass above the ground, all of it needs a supply of mineral nutrients, and all of that is a direct proportional relationship with the volume of life below the ground. And so it's that simple. But the other thing about life below the ground is that it creates a soil structure below the ground that enables the soil to hold vast quantities of water. And it's that water that allows trees to respire. So when the sun beats down on a tree or other vegetation, it heats it up. And the roots of the tree can suck water up from the ground, pump it out through the leaves, and that absorbs the heat that beats down on the canopy. Right. Turns the water into steam, or
water vapor.
Water vapor.
Yep.
So it takes the heat away from the canopy, and it directs that heat out into the atmosphere. So it doesn't have, that steam doesn't have any problem ascending through any amount of greenhouse gases. So it's cooling us like the
Right.
radiator in a car.
Right.
And
so if you don't get the carbon in the soil, it doesn't hold as much water. The plants can't respire as much water. That won't reflect the heat. We get warmer.
Yeah, it won't transpire the heat out through the greenhouse gas layers and into the atmosphere. See, because once you and so if the trees don't have access to that reservoir of water in the ground, then they die.
Yeah.
Well, what happens is they close their stomata to conserve water.
Mm.
So they're not transpiring.
Mm.
They're not cooling down, and you get to a heat of about 32 degrees, right? And they stop photosynthesizing. They just shut down, and that's the mechanism where a lack of water kills the tree.
Mm. Fascinating. So the water, yeah, I didn't know that, but I have heard you talk about the benefits. Obviously, for in drought, it holds on to water better during dry periods, and also in flooding, it absorbs more water, so there's less runoff, which we know is a bit of a problem with the health of our waterways in terms of runoff and sedimentation loss, etc., etc.
Yeah, well, what happens there is that, you see, we grow most of our food in the industrial, conventional way now, that these days with synthetic fertilizers, and a lot of that is synthetic nitrates. And what the nitrates do is they, when the conditions, so basically we flood the soil with nitrates at twice the natural level, right? So all of the biosphere, all of vegetation on Earth that evolved over 2 billion years or whatever it was, got by on a certain level of nitrogen.
Mm-hmm.
And we've doubled it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, biospheres are finely balanced things, and it's impossible to conceive that you could double the amount of nitrogen in a biological system without it having some consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And the consequence of it is that it burns the carbon out of the soil. So your soil loses that sponginess that enables it to hold the water.
Mm-hmm.
And so you lose that capacity for trees to cool themselves down and to cool the planet down. And so then when you get deluges of water, when you get heavy rain for a long period of time, the water can't absorb it, so it just runs off.
Mm-hmm.
So then the sun comes out, the ground's got a bit muddy because the soil's got no structure, it's just dust. And
Mm-hmm.
what hasn't run off has turned to mud. There's no water in the ground. The sun comes out, it bakes the mud into concrete, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't grow stuff in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the torrential rain and the lack of the capacity of the soil to absorb it predicts that you will then suffer a drought.
Mm-hmm. I know there was a bit of research came out by the Ministry for the Environment with their land report. I think it was 2018. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but I feel like it was something like 19 million tonnes of soil are lost every year in New Zealand. Do you remember the figure? Does that sound about right?
You're an order of magnitude or two out there. No, it was what they said was we're losing 192 million tonnes.
That's it. Yeah, a bit more.
192 million tonnes of topsoil a year from our land into the ocean.
Mm.
And there are a number of reasons for that. I mean, trying to farm land that's steep and not suitable is part of the reason, that causes erosion and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But a big part of the reason is this massive overdose of nitrates
mm-hmm.
with which we fertilize our paddocks.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a microbial appetite that creates, microbes eat carbon, and they just eat carbon out of the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And soil has got the same structure that we do. Every biological thing there is on Earth has a carbon structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the microbes eat that carbon structure out of the soil. It becomes compacted, unable to hold water, and there's your problem. So,
do you have any idea of how long it takes to replenish that soil? I know it probably varies greatly from, land to land and different climates, but do you have any idea how long it takes to build that topsoil back that we're losing?
Not long. I mean,
years, centuries?
Oh, no. I don't know whether you saw it, but there was a program on Country Calendar a month or so ago about some guy in the Maniatoto who had been farming with he inherited the farm somehow. It had been farmed with synthetic fertilizers for a long period of time. He was advised to put more on. He did. His crop failed. And the following year, he said, well, I'm going to try something different. So he went to regenerative farming, putting in cover crops and getting dung beetles and all of that. And instant change, and that's the recuperative power of nature.
Yeah, that's where I get a lot of hope from, I guess, is that if you do treat it well and you do understand the balances and idiosyncrasies of the natural world, it will rebound quite quickly, right?
Nature's resilient. They say we're in the start of a sixth great extinction, and I can believe it. But nature doesn't give up without a fight.
Mm-hmm. There was that video I sent through to you yesterday or the day before from Patagonia, who I'm sure most people listening know who they are, but they're an outdoor clothing company. But they've also recently gone into doing regenerative farming, and the quote was something like, "Why wouldn't we?" And the video I sent through to you is a great little animation, and that in there, I think it said if half the world's arable land was farmed regeneratively, we could sequester the I can't remember what it was, the carbon we need, or the carbon we emit every year would be sequestered into the soil. Was that what they said? Something along those lines?
Yeah. So what they said is that if you grew food regeneratively like that, and I think a large part of that is managing grasslands by regenerative grazing, by herbivores, that you could sequester 15 billion tons of carbon in the soil annually. And that if you did that for 20 years, you would our carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere would return to pre-industrial levels.
You just touched on something there that I want to ask about the role of animals in it all, because as you know, there's a lot of chat, or a lot of people and have got values around not eating animal products or not eating meat. What's your kind of thoughts on that and the roles of animals in regenerative farming in general, and soil biology and carbon sequestration?
Well, I mean, a lot of people don't want to eat meat for health reasons, or because they don't want to be responsible for the slaughter of animals and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of people who feel also that they shouldn't be eating meat because it's the production of meat involves unacceptable levels of greenhouse gas emissions.
Mm-hmm.
Now that is true for grain-fed meat.
Mm-hmm.
So where we grow grain to feed cattle in pens, concrete pens, right? Mm-hmm. And so those cattle, you have to grow the grains to feed the grains to the cattle to get the cattle to eat them, and then you can slaughter the cattle and eat the meat.
Mm-hmm.
Undoubtedly, that's huge unnecessary carbon emissions. But if those cattle or herbivores of some sort are grazing grasslands regeneratively, mm-hmm. what they're doing is they're with perennial grasses, what they're doing is not grazing the grass right down to the ground. See, because what's doing the photosynthesizing is the green leaves. Mm. And a lot of the grazing that we do in traditional agriculture, the cattle are allowed to graze that grass right down to the ground. Well, that stops photosynthesis virtually, mm-hmm. and stops the transfer of carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis into the leaves and down into the roots.
Yeah, right.
But if you're grazing regeneratively, you always move the cattle on before they graze the grass down to the ground. So you still, you leave 6 inches of photosynthesizing grass there. Mm-hmm. The cattle's poop on the ground and urinate on the ground. As they go through, they leave dead grass behind that they haven't eaten, they've chewed off and haven't eaten. And that's basically a compost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and that's the way those grazing herds they just followed the rain around.
Yes.
So they would go around their following the seasonal rains, and it was just like a mobile composting unit.
Yeah. Yeah.
and the grass was perennial grass, and it just grew deeper and deeper and deeper. Mm. Walter Jenner says that some of those grasslands, the roots extended down 15 meters.
Far out.
And that's all carbon sequestration.
Yeah, so they're putting the carbon and the sugars right down 15 meters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Richard, I wanted to...
It sequesters more carbon than a rainforest.
The grasslands?
Yeah.
There you go. I did not know that.
The other thing is that only herbivores can recycle the nutrients from grass. Mm-hmm. So if they're not, if the animals, if the herbivores are not eating that grass,
yeah,
it's not getting the nutrients, not getting recycled.
Right, because it's the same with any plants, right? They and humans and any animal that we go through a growth spurt, right? And they take on a lot of energy during that growth spurt. If they then get to full size, full length, the amount of carbon they're sequestering really drops off to plateaus, right? Whereas if they're getting nibbled down to, what do you say, six inches or so?
No. 6 inches. I leave a good length of grass leaf.
They will keep growing, sequestering, getting eaten back down, growing. Yeah.
It's just a cycle of photosynthesis, putting carbon into the sugar into the soil, feeding the biology, the microbes, the mycorrhizal fungi, and that prepares the soil for the roots to go deeper. It opens up the soil so the roots can go deeper and suck more carbon out of the atmosphere, put more into the ground, and it just goes down and down and down.
Down. Richard, I want to change tacks a little bit. I mean, that's fascinating, and I want to keep talking about that, but also conscious of fitting some things into our conversation. I want to go back to the vision of having a network of composting sites and regenerative urban farms in our cities. And one thing that always really stood out for me working with you was, although there were these environmental issues that you wanted to have a solution for, and you've talked to in quite depth just now, but was also the social side of it, right? And one of your real motivators, and which I believe in and agree with very strongly, is the impact that it would have on the health of our communities, right? And the rates of diet-related illness all around the Western world, but especially here in New Zealand, are embarrassing. They're shocking. And when you look at the rates of, diabetes, it's type 2 diabetes. It was called adult onset diabetes because you generally would never get it until you're in your 40s or 50s because it took you that long to kind of do that damage to your body. We're seeing in children, as young as in their early teens to pre-10-year-olds, which is just shocking. And so what I want you to maybe just touch a little bit on your vision around how a network of compost sites and urban regenerative farms would help solve that problem.
When you grow food regeneratively, you're feeding huge diversity in the soil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that diversity that is responsible for putting the mineral nutrients into your food.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can grow a plant that looks healthy and is healthy enough and is certainly saleable as a fresh vegetable with 16 minerals.
Right.
But for good health, we need 50 or more.
Wow.
And so when we grow food in a way that is really just putting some fertilizer on the surface of the soil, allowing it to absorb water and dissolve, and the plants take up what minerals that provides and can grow in it, that doesn't mean that it's good for our health to eat it.
Right.
In fact, it's probably got unsafe carcinogenic levels of nitrates in it.
Yeah. Right.
So a lot of the foods we eat, or most of the foods that, particularly in poor communities, because it's cheap, is food grown with synthetic nitrates.
Yeah.
Food that has been overly refined, so what minerals
processed and packaged,
and packaged, and to increase the shelf life, they've got lots of sugar and fat and salt, and they put a bit of colouring in to make it look attractive when it might not otherwise be, and so it's not really food.
No.
So a large portion of the world's population are literally hungry because they can't even get that food, so they're skinny and malnourished. But a lot of the better off countries, the populations are still malnourished because they don't have the mineral nutrients that they need, but they're obese. Because they've eaten too much fat, sugar, and salt, and so I don't think there's any doubt that if you can get populations, urban populations, growing their food using compost or if you like humic matter, that their diet will improve out of sight. And that you will see the problem of obesity and chronic disease, stroke, heart attack, some cancers,
diabetes,
that will fall away and it'll cease to become a problem.
Yeah, I know this. I don't want to stoke the fire too much here, but I know from you, and I've shared this frustration, been working away in this space for a while, and it just this solution of an urban network of regenerative farms and composting sites just solves so many problems. It solves all these soil health and climate change topics that you've just talked on, and water and soil loss. And then it's all these public health issues, like how much money does diabetes and obesity and other diet-related illnesses cost us as a society, as an economy, and then the connections that come from communities growing their own food and composting together. And I was really lucky to work with you for a period over on Waiheke Island, where we had a model site set up. You guys, I came towards the end of it. You did all the hard work, you and the Waiheke Resources Trust, and got the funding and set up a system there where you had 6 bins together and you collected every week from 120 or so houses each week, and you brought that to the site and you composted on site. And I was just, one of the impressions I got first was how the smiles on people's faces and the enjoyment and the community that came with it. People, they might have missed the pickup and they'd drive in their little bucket of stuff to drop off and, oh, thank you so much, and this is great. And just the community being engaged and involved with that whole cycle, it was just so incredible to watch, right? But yet we've still got this system where big trucks, as you were saying before, that can't even fit down some streets, come along, pick it up and go and chuck it into a hole in the ground. And it's just so frustrating that still in 2020, we are having a real struggle to get, I guess, that change and the powers that be to change from such a broken model to one that has so many benefits.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the great benefits that we didn't talk about is when you have green spaces within walking distance of people who live in cities, they get back that connection with nature. Just the fact that it's a green space. If you're growing food in it, it's an even bigger effect. But it reduces depression rates from anywhere between 30 to 70%. So it's just even before you start eating healthy food and get that boost from a fresh salad that's been grown in decent soil, it's just a huge well-being factor. And we have a government now in New Zealand that's says
a well-being budget.
To do a well-being budget, and you see periodically that they say that they've put so many $1 million into mental health or well-being or something like that. But I think the most effective thing they could do in that regard is to provide more green spaces in cities and grow food in those spaces. And as you say, the camaraderie that developed in that group of people that was actually collecting the food and composting it was fantastic. It's enduring friendships, and one of those people was had spent a lot of time in prison, right? Not, but I think because he was an evil person or anything like that, but when he was a kid, he was dyslexic. He got left behind at school, and life wasn't so good for him. But apparently, the last time he was in prison and sentenced, the judge said to me he was a menace to society. Well,
Yes,
I worked with him for a year turning compost, and he was a model citizen.
Wasn't he? Yep. I know who you're talking about. Fantastic. Richard, I just want to ask a question here that's sitting very patiently. Louise, sorry I've taken a while to get to it. But Louise asks I think she might have missed a little bit at the start, sorry, but how is this getting into schools in New Zealand? Does Richard have a network of these sites? So did you want to maybe just answer that by maybe giving an overview of how many schools you're in at the moment?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I came back from London where we had this opportunity to get into the schools, and I thought, well, it'll be a complete doddle to something this good.
Why wouldn't you? Exactly right.
Like we had the pictures of the kids growing potatoes and every other vegetable under the sun, and learning to cook it and harvest it and eat it, and big smiles on their faces. So and to be fair, the politicians on the waste committee that I presented this material to were very, very keen. But I think that there are more conservative elements in the council that need better proof. And so, and the school that my kids went to when we got back, I tried to persuade the headmistress to put compost system in that school, and it was an emphatic and repeated no way. But so we did compost in the Richmond Road school. You know, they were great.
This is back in Auckland, isn't it?
This is back in Auckland. Yeah. But just last year, towards the end of the year, the government announced a $400 million fund for sustainability projects in schools, and composting was specifically mentioned as on the agenda.
Yes.
Yeah, I know, make you cry. And we helped about 10 schools prepare their application for funding to get CarbonCycle compost boxes in those schools, and 8 of them got a yes. 1 of them hadn't complied with the requirements, and the other one was asked to resubmit. So, right. So we've now put the compost boxes in all but 2 of those schools, and we're making compost.
Fantastic. And so for people who want to learn more about that and follow the journey there at those schools, what's the best way to follow that or reach out or find out?
Well, get in contact with us through the website, or
I've put a link in the webinar chat for those who don't know it.
So we really want to concentrate on those schools where there's likely to be some enthusiasm for making compost and growing food. Because we don't want to be putting compost boxes in schools where nobody's interested in that stuff.
Yes.
But if there are schools or parents who have children in schools who would like their schools to make an application, we'll provide, like, the forms are a little bit of a thing to navigate through. But we've developed a template.
Fantastic.
Application, and we'd be very, very happy to help anybody who wants to go down that road. And the second round of that funding is opening in about a week or 2. And
Fantastic.
It'll be open through to the 3rd of August.
Fantastic.
Anywhere in the country.
How does it feel, Richard? What you just sort of said, and I guess the although there's some forms to fill out, the ease maybe of getting that funding versus what you've been battling for the last decade, really, because I know you have been smashing your head against a brick wall for quite some time. Do you feel a sense of, I don't know the right word, that it's really, there's been a change and that it's becoming easier and people are starting to understand this and starting to realise that we have to do this kind of model?
I think it is, but it's patchy in the sense that, I mean, I take my hat off to the education department. It's a highly enlightened thing that they've done. And schools are actually the very best place to start, because you're teaching those young kids how to fend for themselves, food-wise. Those kids will never be hungry in their life in New Zealand.
Isn't that something that should be absolute first thing taught in a curriculum?
Well, particularly these days, because food security, with the food system we've got, which is basically sucking the carbon out of the ground and pumping it into the atmosphere, and extreme weather that makes conventional agriculture problematic. And we've already seen spikes in food prices that are extreme weather associated in New Zealand, and it's only going to get worse. So food security is a huge issue, and to know how to compost well and to grow your own food is a great insurance.
I think it's a really good point about that, having a network, right? So if you've got thousands of these sites across the city and thousands of regenerative farms, that if there was a weather event, it's unlikely to wipe out all of them. So you've got that resilience, as you say, as opposed to one monocropped farm where one event can wipe out, 90-80% of a crop.
Yeah, that's right. And the other thing is, like, if you look at something like COVID, in COVID, there were 2 consecutive months where the government had to dish out 2 lots of $30 million for food aid.
Yeah.
Now if you had, so that's $60 million for one virus, right? And we may not have seen the last of it. But if citywide you had food bursting out of the ground, that sort of expenditure wouldn't be necessary.
I know. Okay, Richard, I've got some questions that I wanted to ask you that we haven't actually got to yet. So the first one was, how would you describe our current economic system in less than 10 seconds? 3, 2, 1, go.
Well, it's too focused on measuring money transactions, and which may or may not be good for the well-being of the people or the environment. And I think our economy needs to start focusing not just on wellness, but planetary wellness. Because
that's your 10 seconds, but I'll let you carry on because I think you've got a good answer.
Well, that's it, basically.
Yeah.
That's what we've got to do.
Yeah.
We changed the economy for a virus. Global warming and climate change is an existential crisis. The virus was never going to wipe out humanity, but global warming could.
I like to inform my clients I work with that the economic system we've inherited was made up, we invented it, and it can change, and we continually change it, and business models can change, and we continually change them. But the laws of the universe and natural systems have evolved over 4 billion years or so, and they cannot be changed. We cannot change the speed of light, the force of gravity, the way the world spins, the cycle of carbon, cycle of water. So we have to have an economic system that works within the laws of the real world.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, those laws can be changed, but not within the time scales that human life is involved.
What laws can you change?
Well, life on Earth at the moment has evolved with the climate.
Yes, right. Yes,
and all biodiversity has evolved so that all of life and the climate are in sync with each other.
Yes, right.
But if you start losing biomass on a huge scale, then all that biomass, it's made from carbon dioxide. So if you lose it, you're transferring carbon dioxide from life on Earth, and you're putting it in the atmosphere. And so, before life evolved on Earth, the atmosphere was about 20% carbon dioxide, and there was 0 free oxygen.
Right. Yeah.
Then life on Earth is made from that carbon dioxide, and the spread of life on Earth sucked out so much carbon dioxide that now there's only 1/20th of 1% of the atmosphere is carbon dioxide. So, but we can reverse that process. If we lose biodiversity and biomass, then we're just putting that carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. And, if it got really bad, the whole land mass on Earth could turn into a desert, and that's happening at a rapid rate with the loss of soil that you talk about. And we could go back to a situation where we've got 20% carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and no oxygen. So,
see, I would argue that that's not changing the laws. That's just changing the balance.
No. But if it happens slowly enough, life would adapt. But it's happening too fast.
That's a fair point. Okay, I'm going to move on to my next question. If you could start a business tomorrow, what would it be and why?
Exactly what I'm doing. For
Brilliant.
the same reason.
Brilliant.
Trying to master making compost better and spreading it to the masses.
Brilliant. If you could go back in history and change one political, cultural, or economic decision, either globally or here in New Zealand, what would it be? Only one.
Okay, well, there was a time, I think, in the 40s where there was a debate about whether the better way to produce food was through humic matter or composting, or whether it was to use the newfangled synthetic fertilizers. And the humic matter method lost out, possibly because there weren't so many opportunities for super profits using organic methods as opposed to synthetic fertilizer. But anyway, I think that was really when our warming issues and our food insecurity and loss of soil and pollution of rivers and dead zones in the ocean, they all spring from that turning point in history. And if I could go back, I would change it.
Good answer. What's one thing about what you are trying to achieve that really frustrates you?
Oh, just how slow it is, So now we're getting, and I hope it continues, we're getting the composting into the schools, which enable them to grow food, which enable the kids to learn about the carbon cycle and the water cycle and the nitrogen cycle and the nutrient cycle and understand the world about them and understand what's happening with the climate and feed themselves. But, that's 8 years ago that or even more, started out on that project, and it really didn't get traction until March this year. So it shouldn't take that long, but I think you've got to be philosophical that what you're dealing with is changing people's perception. I mean, there's a perception that you can't feed the world without synthetic fertilizers. And that's a very sort of easy to believe proposition, and a lot of people do believe it, but it's not right. So it's a difficult task to change cultures, change ideas, and particularly to change a system that has a lot of inertia in it, because the system is the way it is because a lot of people are making a lot of money out of it, and they're reluctant to let that source of wealth go.
Yes.
So they'll fight to retain it.
Yes.
So that's why you see that there's a movement now for regenerative agriculture, and you're seeing a pushback from people who say, "Oh no, it's not the answer." Well, why are they
buying our agri-chemicals? Yeah. Okay.
So I just have to be patient.
You're a very patient man.
And philosophical.
Okay, a couple more questions, and then we'll go probably about another 5 minutes for those who are still listening in. What's something that you have changed or given up in your own life that you've found really hard to do in relation to composting, improving the world, being more sustainable, etc.?
Oh, well, I gave up being a lawyer, which wasn't that hard to do. But it did involve, loss of income.
Yeah.
And it was giving up something certain for something highly uncertain. But on the other hand, it was it was following a passion. And I think you only get one chance in life to do that. So it wasn't difficult, but it has been hard at times.
Yes, I know. Well, I hope that, this recent upturn, I guess, in interest and funding and support and understanding can really start to repay you some of that hard work, and not necessarily in a financial sense, but in a, I don't know, emotional, or just a sense of really making that impact and that change that you've believed in for so long and worked towards for so long.
Well, it's just good to see it happening, It's you feel that things are starting to come right with the world.
I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, my last question of these is, who is someone you admire and why? You can't say me.
Okay, present company accepted. I think, a living person who is a bit of a hero of mine is Walter Jenner.
Okay.
And he's given a number of talks. He's a former CSIRO scientist, soil biologist, and he's worked with all these issues that we're talking about now his entire life. He's got impeccable credentials, enormous knowledge, and right at his fingertips. He's getting on now. He gives these talks. They're incredibly lucid, and he's spreading knowledge and understanding about basically what is an operating manual for the planet. And I haven't read or seen or heard of anybody who has the knowledge that he has and the capacity to impart it.
Nice.
So he does. He's unfailingly polite.
Yeah.
He's lucid, and he's charming. And so, the particular talk that I like is, I think it's Conversations from the Edge. You can look it up on the internet. Jenner, Jehne.
Jehne.
It's about an hour and 45 minutes of pure joy.
Walter Jenner. Okay,
Yeah.
And what was it called again? Sorry,
I think it's Conversations from the Edge.
Okay. Okay. So now, just to wrap up, Richard, and I'm sorry to wrap it up, but because I know we'll see again and we'll continue the conversation on again, and we'll have many more after that. But there's only so much space up in the cloud to record this. So we're going to go into our word association game that I'd like to do for each of these talks. And so you're probably pretty familiar with how these work. I'm going to say a word or two, a term, or mention a topic, and you're going to give me the first word that comes into your head. If you don't want to, you may cop out and say pass. I will judge you, but you're allowed to say pass if you so wish. Are you ready?
Go.
Fossil fuels.
Coal.
Agrochemicals.
Poison.
Poison. Religion.
Faith.
Drugs.
Alcohol.
Politics.
Interest.
Regenerative. Sorry?
Interests.
Regenerative farming.
Good.
New Zealand.
Team of 5 million.
COVID-19.
Same.
Sustainability.
Misused.
Composting.
Go for it.
Nice. That's our word association game. Thank you. Thank you for not passing. Well, Richard, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, and thank you from a personal note for being somewhat of a mentor for me over the last 5 years or so since we first met. I've learned so much from you over the years with these many conversations we've had, and I've always wanted to put down a tape recorder or my phone and record some of the things we've had. So today's been sort of on my wish list for a while, and I feel like we really only scratched the surface. There's so much more knowledge in that head of yours that I'd love to squeeze out and share with other people. But I feel very blessed to be able to have had that access to your knowledge and your drive to learn more and continually improve and stay resilient to this goal that I have learned will just have such a positive impact on, firstly, our local communities, secondly, our entire city here in Auckland, and thirdly, all of New Zealand and in the world if they want to adopt it. So yeah, thank you for all that and for all the hard work that you've put in. I've seen it. I've seen all the sanding of the slats over the years, seen the carrying of the compost, and I've seen the frustrations, and I've seen the challenges, and I'm just really happy to see it's like I said before, some real upturn in the understanding and the support that's coming your way, and it's just fantastic to see the CarbonCycle compost company really come to life a bit in the last few weeks or so. So yeah, thank you for all of that, and well done on all of your work today.
Look, it's been a pleasure, Nick, and it was great for you to be part of that journey, and in those early days when we were struggling, and it was hard work, and that was the time when you got the Bags Not campaign going, and
yes,
and got rid of single-use plastic bags from supermarkets. So it was a privilege to be associated with you.
Thank you.
And now you've done amazingly well.
Oh, fantastic! Well, yeah, you've definitely influenced me, Richard, in a very positive and in a big way. So thank you very much, and I'll see you again at a compost site soon. It's about time I got in there and got my hands dirty again and turned some compost. So thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, and we will be making this. We will be putting this recording up on our website. You can go to gowellconsulting.co.nz, and it's on our resources page, and we'll share the link with Richard and CarbonCycle Compost. They may or may not choose to put it up on their website and their social media channels. But yeah, thank you very much for everyone for listening. And yeah, if you want to get in touch with Richard directly through the website, the link is in the webinar chat there on the side. Yeah, so thank you very much again, everyone. Thank you, Richard, and until next time.
Thank you.
All right, ta-ta.
Ciao.